Hi students, welcome to the BYJU'S Hindu News Analysis for 19th of December 2018. UPSC every now and then appoints committees to look into changes that can be brought about in the examination pattern. One such move was about introduction of the ethics paper previously. So what was the need? So the expectation basically was to make sure that the officers who come into the service are filled with integrity and probity, and this is the expectation of the UPSC. So ethics paper is not about big words that we write in our examination, but it is small actions of care and compassion. Ethics is not about friction writing, spelling utopia in the paper, but it is about embracing humanity to the civil service. Ethics is not about talking lot and lot in the paper, but it is about walking an extra mile to practice the same. So as aspirants, it is imperative to construct, build and mold the self for the country's future, living for the tricolor of sacrifice, valor and strength, and persisting the values of Dhamma Chakra. So let's get started and look into the first article. So the first article says Center drafts child protection policy. So what is the context here? So the Ministry of Women and Child Development has drafted one of the policy after repeated nudging from the Supreme Court to make sure that the safety of children are taken into picture. So this particular draft that the Ministry of Child and Women Development have come up with has provided certain code of conduct for all the employees within the organizations and within the institutions to provide certain declaration to be signed to protect those children who are accommodated within this particular institution. So what is the background? So when we look into the background, what happens is the Supreme Court repeatedly had prodded and had nudged and encouraged the center to come up with a policy. Why? Because there were previously n number of instances that were surfacing and ones which were not even surfacing. And what are we speaking about? One, to do with the sexual abuse of all those children in the homes, and then there were people who were sexually abused, violated, and all these children were in destitute homes. So in order to protect this, the apex court, that is the Supreme Court, had asked the center to consider framing a national policy on protection of the children. So the Ministry of the Women and Child Development here has come up with suitable proposal and has drafted one of the notifications which is already placed on its website. So what does this draft basically speak about? So what this policy goes on to say is that it will apply to all sets of institutions and organizations. So what do we mean by it? It includes the private organizations, it includes the corporates, it includes the media houses, government as well as the private sector. So this particular draft has made sure that it is taking into picture all types of organizations as well as institutions, which involves the government as well as the private as well. And what is the most important point is this will have zero tolerance towards child abuse as well as the exploitation. So what it has done is it has made sure that it requires organization to lay down certain rules or certain facts or certain mechanisms to make sure that they do not use any foul language or behavior that is very inappropriate to the children, or something which can trigger harassment, which is abusive, sexually provocative, demeaning or culturally inappropriate, which will have a negative mindset and negative vibes on the mindset of the children. So what this particular draft has gone on to do is it has gone on to designate a staff member to have a constant vigil within this particular organization or within this particular institution, and this staff member has to ensure that all these procedures that have been laid by the Supreme Court are followed, are in place to ensure that the safety and protection of children are present. And what we have to do is this staff member will basically report any abuse in case it happens within the premises. And the most important point that we have to understand here is it is not only the staff member, in case there is a person who is also associated with it and he suspects there is a physical, sexual or emotional abuse that has been put up on a particular child, then he can report the same on an helpline number, and that is 1098, or report it to the police or the chief welfare committee. So this is the structure that has been laid by the Ministry of Women and Child Development. But what we also have to consider is there are certain gray areas. So what are the gray areas that this particular article goes on to speak? Currently, when you look into this particular draft, right, the whole definition of what is child protection is little ambiguous. It's in gray area. So this particular definition of child protection, what it basically means, what it intends to do is not clear enough. This has a very gray area, ambiguous enough. So this can lead to certain interpretations of their own. So what the government will have to picture in, what the government will have to come up is an unambiguous definition as to what it intends to do. So basically this definition that the draft currently has needs certain word changes, statement formats, and this will make sure that the safety of the children are ensured. And apart from this, what we also have to consider is there was previously what is called as the National Child Policy 2013. So this National Child Policy had certain important measures, for the example, for children who have migrated, or communal or sectarian violence children, children forced into begging or in conflict with the law, and those infected with HIV/AIDS. So these set of issues were previously covered, but this particular draft that we are speaking about does not have a mention of it. So what the previous National Child Policy was much better, but this draft has failed to take into account the previous consideration. So what this article goes on to say is, in the future, in case the government plans to come and make changes with this draft, because it is asked for the public opinion, then it has to make sure these set of words and measures are included. And apart from this, it also does not talk about the role of the state for ensuring the protection of child rights or addressing certain local grievances that are there to do with the local governments. This is also one of the gray areas that we are speaking about. So currently, since it is a draft, it is put up on their website and it is asked for some public comments. What we will do is, let's stick it for now, and in case there is any future changes that we see, we will surely have the discussion once again. As of now, this is what we need to know. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says, coach can't rule on train timing, says the Supreme Court. So what is the context here? So there was a public interest litigation. This was filed in the Supreme Court, where few people, the petitioners, had felt that the trains were not on time and there was not connectivity in and around the area that they were there. So they experienced a lot of delay, and because there was not much of railway infrastructure in the places that they were living, they filed a public interest litigation asking the Supreme Court to take up an initiative and tell the executive about the train timings as well as the connectivity issue. To this, what the Supreme Court has gone on to say is that this particular domain does not picture in the domain of the Supreme Court. Why? Because it is an executive role. What the Supreme Court has gone on to say is this particular viewpoint does not come under the lens of the Supreme Court. So it is the executive's role to look into where the infrastructure has to be developed. It is the executive's role to see where the problems are. So it is the executive's role to see where the infrastructure needs to be developed. We, the Supreme Court, have no relevance to it because we don't have the statistical evidence. It is for the ground reality. It is for the ground people, the field people who are working in the field. They are the ones who have the relevant expertise. They are the ones who would know what is happening with respect to the rail infrastructure, why there is a delay in the process, why the connectivity has to be provided. They have all the statistical evidence. We do not have it. So it is for the executive to decide what should be prompted, what should be the way of the future, and what should be the way the structural changes have to be made. So the Supreme Court has gone on to say such PILs cannot be entertained. Why? Because of certain deficiencies within the system. We do not have the relevant facts. We cannot consider all these circumstances, and further, such matters are not appropriate for adjudication in a PIL. So this is what the Supreme Court has gone on to say and has dismissed this particular public interest litigation. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article that we are speaking about is about the Katowice consensus. So as we have previously said, this is one of the most important consensus or the climate summit. So this COP of 24 is one of the important developments that we have to understand from the Paris Agreement. So what was the Paris Agreement? What is the special agreement that we are speaking about? What is the rule book? What is the agenda? Why was the Paris Agreement weak? And what is the current successful summit? What are the issues in this particular area? What has India got from this particular summit? Its weakness are all being worked out. And what we will be doing is we will be uploading a video in relevance to the Katowice very shortly, and what we will also release is a text-based notion in the form of an issue in news which will comprehensively cover this entire Katowice summit. So just wait for few more days and it should be there on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. So as of now, we will not be discussing this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says restoring the balance. So what is this article all about? So this article basically is looking at from India's and Maldives relationship point of view. So what we have to understand is previously there was an administration, the government, which was led by Abdul Yamin. So Abdul Yamin is said to be one of those presidents which Maldives had who was very close to the Chinese. So with his administration there was certain alienation, there was certain drifting away of India and Maldives relationship. So when you look into what exactly happened with respect to Abdul Yamin, there were a few agreements, free trade agreements that was signed directly with China, and this was not in resonance with India's values of democracy. You also had the Chinese and the Maldives friendship bridge which connects the Malay's eastern edge to the western corner of the island of the Hulhule. Then you also had the Chinese investment which was large scale, and you also had a number of issues that India had with respect to the Maldives. So you had issues where visas were not given to the Indians, you had issues where helicopters were asked to be lifted off from Maldives, and all those treaties and agreements which India had espoused and supported previously was completely declined, and India and Maldives relation had certain volatility. And post this, what we had was the elections, and with coming up of elections, what we see is the defeat of Abdul Yamin, and post this, what we see is the appointment of Mohammed Saleh as the president of Maldives. So with this appointment, what this article goes on to say is all the negative vibes, all the issues that we had with Maldives needs to be swung back. We need to regret the past, but what we have to do is we have to make sure that this particular relationship right now is intact and enjoyable in the future. So recently, when you look into the current context, Mr. Soleh paid an Indian visit where the two sides emphasized their traditional close bond. So he went on to say that Maldives and India have the old friendship and reaffirmed his government's India first policy. So what this article basically goes on to say is Prime Minister Narendra Modi also wanted to make sure that India and Maldives relationship are intact and the bond humi increases. So as a result of which, what he made sure was he went into the swearing ceremony of Mr. Soleh. He made sure that he personally makes sure that he is there, and this set of relationship is further enhanced to the next level. So the most important point here is, as we had previously discussed, China is one such country which has a lot of power when it comes to its monetary sanctions. So what it has done previously is it has infused a lot of money in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the loan, as well as the grants that it has provided the Maldivian government. So there was a particular drift towards the Chinese economy, and this was a problem to India. So what India has currently done is, when it comes to the loans that the Chinese government has given previously, it amounted as much as 1.3 billion or as much as quarter of the Maldives nation's GDP. So in order to compensate for the same, what India has done is it has announced a financial assistance of about 1.4 billion for the Maldives in the form of budgetary support, currency swap, as well as concessional lines of credit. So what is India doing right now is, what China was doing, India is planning to do the same. And at the same time, what these two countries have also done is they're planning to consolidate all their energy together and bring about certain changes in the form of security interest, in the form of surveillance, in the form of boosting up their ties and welcoming and expanding their economics. So what this basically means is, in terms of the fisheries, in terms of the tourism, transportation, connectivity, health, education, jobs, and in terms of defense, they are planning to make sure that they are enhancing their bilateral cooperation. So what India should currently do is, it should not look at India-Maldives relationship from Chinese angle. Yes, there is Chinese presence. Yes, the Chinese will infuse more money right now, but the problem is we should not be looking our relationship with Maldives in terms of the triangle relationship, but instead it should be a bilateral relationship. How is that we would be able to add value to the Maldivian relationship? How is that we would be able to communicate with the people? Now that democracy has been established, what we also need to make sure is, whatever the regime is in the future, irrespective of the government in the picture, what we have to make sure is we are providing more and more loans, more and more budgetary allocations to the Maldives, so that they don't drift away from India. And at the same time, what we also have to make sure is that we are able to communicate with the people of Maldives. Let's take the example of Afghanistan. When you look into what is the call of the Afghanistan people, they have a very beautiful idea or opinion about India. It is the same type of idea and opinion that the Maldivian government should also have, the Maldivian governance should also have, and the Maldivian people should also have. Let's take the example of Nepal. So the people of Nepal currently kind of abhor Indians and the Indian government for all that happened in 2015. So India should take a precedences from the past and make sure that the hard power is not enforced, but instead the soft power mode, the more of soft diplomacy needs to be enforced to make sure that people love India and Indians and make sure that we have a personal touch and connect with the people of Maldives. So this article basically speaks about re-infusing the energy into the India and Maldives relationship. So this is what we need to understand in respect to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article that we are speaking about is called as the fatal fires. So what is this article all about? What we are speaking is about the hospital fires. Disasters by itself have an uncanny ability to bring to forefront the vulnerabilities of the systems, the structures, the processes, as well as people, which in turn cause large scale damages, and hospitals are no exception to this. So what has happened in the present context is, when you look into the context, it says that there was a devastating fire at the Andheri hospitals of the Employee State Insurance Corporation in Mumbai that killed 8 people, in shocking reminder of the low priority of fire safety that has been set up in the Indian hospitals. So what we have to initially understand is that hospitals can basically have two types of disasters. So what are the two types of disasters? One, the internal disaster. The other is the external disaster. So what is the internal disaster here? So anything that happens within the premises of the hospital, not from the external sources. Let's take the example of the hospital fire, or exposure to certain hazardous material within the hospital, and utility features that are presently there does not work on time. And then you also have the number of things where there is a collapse of the hospital, or the building construction was not intact. So all this is happening internally, and at the same time what you also have is the external disaster that can strike a hospital due to certain external factors. So what are these external factors? Let's say there is an earthquake, or let's say there is an epidemic. So the hospital responsibility is nowhere linked to its internal mismanagement, but the problem is due to certain external agencies. So on one side you have the internal disasters, which is due to mismanagement by the authorities. On the other side you have the external disasters, which is due to the natural forces. So next question that pops up is, what are the causes? What are the causes for such hospital fires to strike? So what we have to understand in this particular case is there is inadequate or non-compliance of certain structural elements of hospitals to the building codes. Any government for that matter will obviously come up with certain framework and laws, but it is for the hospital authorities who need to make sure that they are sticking up to these rules, they are sticking up to these norms, but they are not doing it. Let's take a simple example. Let's take there is a foundation that is being laid on a marshy soil, but this will require certain adjustments that they'll have to make when it comes to the foundational level. They'll have to soil test it, make sure that the foundation is intact, which majority of the hospitals do not do. So what is happening currently is the building codes that have been laid by the government, that is by the state government, are not being complied. So these are one such things that are happening. So as a whole, what is happening is all these safety norms that was supposed to be employed as requested by the government has been flouted, and because of this there is failure of the hospital structure, and then what is the resultant is deaths. And next important point we also have to understand here is that there is something called as hospital disaster management plan, which number of hospitals do not have itself. So there is absence of the operational hospital disaster management plan which they were supposed to have, which they were supposed to execute, and which they were supposed to implement when such type of disaster strikes. But the problem is there is complete absence of this particular plan. And at the same time, let's take an example that there is a fire which is caught up in a particular hospital. What happens is you need a planning and a preparedness to come up in such a case of a disaster. But the problem is there is lack of planning or preparedness to respond to such disasters. The next key important point is there are number of officers or institutions within a particular hospital. These are the ones which will be looking into the disaster management. There is the problem. Because of the multiple resources that are employed within an organization, there is inadequate or complete lack of internal as well as external communication. While there is no communication that is happening between these officers, between these institutions within the hospital premises, this is leading to the problem. And the most important point of all is the networking issue. How is that the hospital is able to communicate with the state authorities? How is that the hospital is able to communicate with the municipal authorities? It is this point, the networking point, which is currently missing. So when you look into the structure of how the constitution is made and how the list is, the concurrent list, the state list as well as the central list, both the health as well as the disaster management comes up under the state subjects. So it is these set of organizations, hospitals, which has to have a networking with these set of health and disaster management authorities, which they currently have. So it is these set of causes which have been a major problem when it comes to the hospital fires. So the next question that pops up is, what is the safe hospital? So how do we have to make sure that there is no fire that catches up? Even if there is a fire that catches up, how is that we are able to come up with required amount of solutions? So one such concept that was proposed by the World Health Organization is the practice of safe hospital. So what is this safe hospital? So basically you have the World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organization, which has defined a safe hospital as that which will not collapse in disasters, which will kill the patients and the staff. So when you are coming up with the architecture, make sure that your architecture is meeting the intended standards. So what they have defined is that this particular hospital initially when it is constructed will not collapse even in case of a disaster. So the next point it says is, even when a disaster strikes, they should be in a position to continue to function and provide its services to the critical community, facility, to the all those patients who are there within that particular hospital, which is the most important point. So there are certain critical ailments, certain patients who are in the ICUs and so on. These set of people will always require constant services. So in case of disaster that is striking, they should still be able to provide these type of critical services to all these patients. And apart from this, what it has also gone on to say is that you need to have a organized structure, a contingency plan, and a health workforce who would be trained to keep up with the network operational. So what it says is, on one side you need to make sure that the infrastructure is intact, you need to provide the critical services, and the workforce, the health workforce, should have to provide the network operations. So this is what the World Health Organization has gone on to say when it comes to the safe hospital. So what are the other set of solutions this article goes on to say? So what this article says is that the National Accreditation Board for Hospitals and Healthcare Providers goes by the National Building Code and its specific norms for the hospitals, which include minimum required for the multi-story structures such as alarms, sprinkler systems specified with staircases, smoke barrier enclosures, check against storage of combustible materials in area where patients are kept. So what it has gone on to say is that we have these large buildings, so these large buildings will need to have certain emergency exits, at least minimum of about 4. What it further goes on to say is that these set of hospitals will need to have inspection every now and then and at least of 6 months, and this needs to be videographed, and each and every room in the hospital should have a map where they are located, where are the emergency escape routes, and all these entry and the exit points will need to be so wide that in spite of people rushing across, this particular exit points need to accommodate them. And next important point that it also goes on to say is that it speaks about certification of facilities through the third party audit, which should be made compulsory to eliminate conflicts of interest involving official agencies. So it should not be people where bureaucracy is involved. These people have a reciprocity basis that they give a certification, no objection certification, but instead there needs to be an individual independent organization which does all these audit and make sure in case there is a deficiency, there is a problem area, they are reporting the same to the hospital authorities and to the government, so that the hospital authorities and the management come up with a relevant infrastructure. And what it has further gone on to say is that this particular hospital should further have the fire resistant coatings, so that in case there is a caught up of the fire, it needs to be changed. So what we have to understand in this particular case is all these accommodations will have to be coming up into picture. The state government will have to take up the prerogative, because the health and the disaster management comes under the loop of the state department, and this becomes a very important move. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says benefit of doubt must go to the accused, says the Supreme Court. So what is the context here? So it says the benefit of doubt in cases based on a flawed police investigation must favor the accused irrespective of the gravity of the crime. So what does this basically mean? So when you look into a particular case study, you have two types of incidents that can occur. So you have the accused. So the accused is supposed to be proved guilty by the prosecution. So the prosecution will have to provide facts, evidences. This is in support of the police investigation as well. But certain times what happens is the police will not be able to provide the evidences as well as the facts. With all their investigation that happens, they are still not able to provide required amount of documentations. So in this particular case, what the Supreme Court has gone on to say is it has two possible views. One, you can prove that a particular person, that is the accused, is guilty and then he will be executed. And next, what you also have is the accused who is there in this particular case is also proved innocence. But what the Supreme Court says is, in case we are not able to provide or give certain statistical evidence, the accused cannot be expected to relinquish his innocence at the hands of an efficacious prosecution which is ridden with investigation deficiency. So what it has gone on to say is, in case the prosecution and the police are not able to prove for the fact that it is this accused who has done this particular crime, then the advantage will go for the accused. That is because you, the prosecution, you, the police, are not able to give us the statistical evidence. The court does not believe in hypothesis. The court only believes in facts and evidences. In case you are not able to provide whatever is the crime, irrespective of the gravity and the magnitude, this particular person accused will be set free, and that is what the Supreme Court has gone on to say. However, this particular rule regarding the benefit of doubt does not warrant any acquittal of the accused by resorting to certain conjectures or fanciful considerations, but this only on the basis of the delay in the deficiency or the practical evidences not being supposed by the prosecution to the court. So this is what this particular article goes on to speak about. So let's look into the next article. So the next article is important factually, and what is important is from GS1 perspective, that is to do with the space. So what does this article say? Article speaks about the new object which has been nicknamed far out. So let's try and understand what this article say. It says scientists have discovered the most distant body ever observed in our solar system, which is located over 100 times farther than the Earth is from the sun. So what it says is it's about 11 billion miles from the sun. Its official name is called as VG18. It has a nickname called as far out. The object, which will likely be classified as a dwarf planet, is about 300 miles in diameter and has a pinkish hue. So kindly remember, this far out has a pinkish hue, which can be a probable question in your prelims examination. It is about 100 times farther from the sun than Earth is, and almost 4 times more distant than the Pluto. So these are the factual points that we have to remember. In case there is anything else that adds up in the future, we will surely pick up the discussion as well. But as of now, these are the facts that we have to remember. It says Soputan, a volcanic mountain recently seen in news, is in Indonesia. So let's look into the map for the same. So Mount Soputan on the northern part of Sulawesi Island in Indonesia is a volcanic mountain which erupted twice recently. Soputan, which stands 5853 till fort, is one of the Indonesia's more than 120 active volcanoes. So Indonesia is an archipelago of more than 260 million people, is prone to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions due to its location on the Pacific Ring of Fire. So where is this Mount Soputan? It is on the northern Sulawesi Island. And apart from this, we also need to have a check at the seas in and around that area. One is the Banda Sea, the other one is the Celeb Sea. So let's look into the next question. So the next question says, with respect to anchor investor, consider the following statements. He is the first investor in any round that provides subsequent investors a degree of confidence. Anchor investors belong to the qualified institutional buyers category. So select the correct answer. The answer for this is both the answers are right. So let's look into the explanation. It says he is the first investor in any round that provides subsequent investors a degree of confidence. But briefly, anchor investors are entities which are offered and subscribed to shares in IPO before the offers open to the public. Anchor investors belong to qualified institutional buyers category. They would be in better position to gauge the fundamentals and the future prospects of the company. So let's look into some of the previous year question papers. It says which of the following are included in the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, and the answer for this is 1 and 4 only. So let's look into the mains practice question. It says giving life a new life is the motto of the hospitals, but lack of regulatory mechanism and not following codes can result in hospital deaths at the time of hospital fires. Suggest suitable measures. So we have already discussed this particular answer. So please write all your answers on the comment section so that you guys can have a peer review, and the BYJU'S team can also assist you with respect to your answer writing as well. So this is it for today. Thank you so much. All the best.